YouTube, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dibs, and in today's video, we've got something fun in store for you today. I want to go over my top 10 tips for a rookie's first time trip to the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, probably my favorite place to visit on earth. I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time there over the past few years specifically. I have made some mistakes along the way. I've learned from them, and now I want to share that knowledge with you guys so that when you make your first trip out to the islands, you have an amazing time and fall in love with that country just like I did years ago. Small caveat here, this is all going to come from the perspective of somebody who is budget conscious and coming from America. So if you find this kind of content inspiring or helpful at all, please help us grow the channel. Like and subscribe, follow for more. We got a lot of adventures coming up. Now, with all that being said, let's get right into the list here with tip number one. Tip number one is going to be all about buying your flight and planning your trip to come out here. So if you're at all like me, budget is a concern, right? You don't want to spend thousands of dollars on this flight. As a matter of fact, you can probably get this flight for well under $1,000 if you play your cards right. I am not the kind of person who's going to be able to give you all the greatest Google Flights hacks. There's plenty of channels out there that do that specialize in that. So by all means, go search on those, see what you can find. This is more of just like a generic and how I arrange my flights when I'm searching. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to decide what date I'd like to go out there, or date range, right? So once you've got your date decided, what you want to do is go into Google Flights, start with your departure city and whatever city you're going to arrive in, and then sort the flight prices by price, obviously, but second way to sort them is going to be by duration. You really want to utilize as much time as you can in the country. And we're going to talk shortly about why that's important here in a little bit. But basically, what you don't want to do is book a cheap flight just because it's the cheap flight if it's got 37 hours of travel time. If you're going to be flying across 3 different continents, you're going to be having 12, 13-hour layovers in some places. Unless you just don't really have a problem with sleeping in an airport terminal in an uncomfortable chair, maybe that's an option. But for most of us, we want to get there as quickly as possible and start having fun. That is my first tip for you, is to sort the flight by price and then time, total travel time. So this kind of bleeds in nicely to tip number 2, which is where to arrive at. Now, generally speaking, there's really, as far as I know, only 2 international airports that you can fly into from America. Don't quote me on that. I have heard that Bohol and Davao have international airports that you can fly into, but generally speaking, it's going to either be Cebu or Manila. Now, I have yet to fly into Manila. I'm going to do that soon for the first time ever, and I'm a little bit terrified and anxious about it. But the reason why I'm going to Manila, even though my ultimate destination is in the Visayas, aka Cebu City, is simply because it's so much cheaper to fly into Manila. You have a lot more options in terms of flexibility of when to leave and when to arrive flying into Manila than you do into Cebu. My flight into Manila was actually about $700 cheaper than it would have been flying into Cebu around the same date range. It's actually a lot cheaper for me to fly into Manila, spend one night in a hotel, and then take a domestic flight one way to Cebu the next day than it is to just fly straight to Cebu. So definitely decide where you want to go. I can speak on Mactan Airport in Cebu as being probably the easiest, cleanest, and least chaotic international airport I've ever flown into. I hear quite the opposite about Ninoy Aquay in Manila, but we're going to find out soon, and I'll be sure to let you know my thoughts on that one. All right, so now we've got the flight figured out. We know where we're going, we know when we're going. So what do we need to know when we get there? Well, tip number 3 is all about convenience, and that is cash. Cash is king in the Philippines. It's absolutely true. Now, this is not to say that you're not going to ever be in instances where you can use a debit card or a credit card. Those do exist, especially in the cities. But generally speaking, especially if you're going to the smaller islands, which is absolutely what you should be doing, it pays to have cash. For me personally, I do like to exchange my cash at the airport. Now, I know people might flame me in the comments and say, oh, you can get so much better rates outside of the airport. That is true. However, if you're exchanging 1,000 USD, you're going to save yourself about 30 bucks by going outside of the airport. To me, it's really not worth it because you're going to be sitting there in traffic. You're going to maybe find a good place, maybe not. Maybe they'll take your money, maybe they won't, which, by the way, you have to absolutely have the crispest, cleanest bills possible, or they are not going to take it. Pro tip, if they do refuse that because there's a tear or there's marking on the dollars, go to Gaisano Mall if you can find one. There's one in almost every city in the Philippines. They have currency exchange near the customer service area at the front of the grocery store. They have taken some pretty tattered money from me in the past and actually given me pesos for it. So remember that. If you can't find anywhere to take your money, find a Gaisano Mall. They're going to take your money. But it's very important that you have plenty of cash on hand, because when you get to these smaller islands, there's a really good chance that the ATM amount on the island is limited and or not in service or out of money. This happens far more often than you would imagine. What do you do when you don't have cash, but you need to pay for things, obviously? Well, that brings us into tip 4 pretty nicely, which is what apps should you install on your phone before arriving? So first most important app you definitely want to have on your phone is an app called Grab. I'm going to leave links in the description for all of these apps down below, but definitely invest in getting the Grab app on your phone. Not only can you get rides just like you could if it was Uber, but you can get food, medicine, groceries, whatever you need delivered to you. You can book car rides, van rides, motorcycle rides, whatever you need, the Grab app is going to hook you up with. It's kind of like Lyft meets Uber Eats meets Favor, all rolled into one nice, neat little package. The other plus side to the Grab app is you can actually link a US credit card to the app and then use that to pay for things that you would otherwise have to spend cash on. This is especially convenient if you've only got 1,000 peso bills and you're about to order some food or a ride that's going to cost 100 pesos. They're not going to have change, or they're going to expect some kind of really big tip for you to have the change to give them. So the Grab app is great. You cannot link your debit card to it, but you can link a credit card to it if you have one. So definitely Grab. Now, the next thing that you want to do is have some sort of eSIM on your phone, assuming you have an unlocked SIM card. Always check into that too before you go buy an eSIM. I made the mistake of buying an eSIM because I have an iPhone 15 and I thought, well, hell, it's an eSIM. Certainly I can just activate this, right? But my SIM card is still locked because my phone is still being paid for. And if you have an iPhone specifically, there's a good chance that your SIM card is locked and you cannot use an eSIM. But if you can, there's plenty of eSIM apps out there. Olafly is one I keep hearing about that everybody says is great. Whatever your choice may be, there's tons of other creators out there that have partnerships with these companies and offer discount codes. Next app to download is actually 2 apps, and that's going to be Google Maps and Google Translate. Now, luckily, most of the Philippines, almost everybody speaks at least a little bit of English, but you will oftentimes somewhat run into an issue where maybe there is a little bit of a language barrier. Having Google Translate is great because you can download ahead of time Cebuano and Tagalog, which are probably the 2 most popular languages spoken in the entire country outside of English. And when you've got those translations downloaded and you're not on cellular data, you can still access them and do live translations. So that's something good to know. Same thing with Google Maps. Download the data, especially for the little islands that you're going to, so that you can make navigating yourself a breeze out there. And you don't always have to rely on a cell signal to make sure that you can find where you're going when you need somewhere to go. Now, the last app that I will recommend you download is some sort of money wiring app. And this is kind of a worst case scenario type issue. Let's say you find yourself in one of these little islands or these little villages. Yet again, there's only one ATM and it's out of service and something has happened. Maybe you've gotten your bag stolen. You need some cash, right? So how are you going to get cash when you have no debit card, no working ATM, nobody to talk to borrow any money from? There's an app that I recommend called Remitly. And what this is going to do, you can sync your US debit card up to that app. It's going to allow you to transfer money within seconds usually to local Filipinos who may own a business like a sari-sari store or a hardware store. Those Filipinos can receive that money through GCash, and then they can cash that GCash out and give it to you for a small fee. I've only had to do it one time before, but the fee that I paid the Filipino to do this was actually a lot less than it would have been to just pull money out of an ATM. Unfortunately, most Filipinos don't have a lot of cash on them, even business owners. So you're not going to be able to get a lot of money this way, but it's definitely a good clutch app to have in your back pocket in case worst case scenario happens and you just need cash right away. So speaking of things that may or may not go so well, one thing that you can never count on is the weather being consistent there. Well, that's not exactly true. You can definitely count on it being consistently rainy, even in the dry season. It's gonna rain. You're gonna probably catch some rain at any given time of the day. It definitely makes sense to plan your trip accordingly to the weather and where you're going to go. Generally, there's just 2 seasons in the Philippines: the wet season, which runs from April until the end of October, and the dry season, which goes from November until the end of March. There's little windows here and there on the sides of those months, and the seasons definitely are different time ranges depending on whether you're in Palawan versus whether you're in Siargao, or if you're in northern Luzon, or if you're in the south part of Mindanao. Just be aware that the weather matters, okay? And the reason why it matters is because you are going to oftentimes be counting on ferry rides or airplane rides from one island to another. If the weather's bad, the ferry might not run. So what you never want to do is make sure that you have a flight back to America or your home country the same day, or even the day after you plan on leaving one of these smaller islands like Siquijor or Camiguin or something like that. Because if the weather shuts down the ferry service and there's only 1 or 2 ferry departures a day, you might be completely screwed. You might be missing a flight back home, and it might be costing you $1,000 or more to rearrange that flight. I don't know. Now, this is all kind of related the same way to tip number 6, which is be prepared for the difficulties that you're going to experience traveling around in the Philippines. Even if things go according to plan and the weather is perfect, it is still quite an event to go from one place to another. Prime example, the very first time I ever went to the country, I landed in Cebu. I took a 4-hour van ride to San Remigo and then a 2-hour ferry ride to Bantayan. So even after flying for about 23 hours grand total, I still had almost 8 hours of travel time in front of me before I got to my accommodations. That's rough. But it's not uncommon for there to be major traffic jams, even outside of the cities where you wouldn't expect it. All it takes is one work truck, one bus with a flat tire. Even though the ferries and things are scheduled at certain times, you can almost set your watch to the fact that they are going to always be on what they call Filipino time, which is usually like an hour later or so than what the advertised time is going to be. And I've experienced this myself firsthand. I remember the very first time I ever went to Coron, it was when I was living and working in the Philippines. And actually, I spent 6 hours in that tiny little airport in San Francisco or San Fernando, not sure, Coron, for a flight that kept getting delayed, and then eventually canceled. And so, it cost me another 3,000 pesos in a hotel, it cost me another 1,000 pesos in van rides to and from the airport the next day, and it cost me a day of work because I wasn't able to get back to the city and back to my workstation. Something to keep in mind, embrace the chaos though, because that's part of the fun. And you won't be stressed about it if you don't make a stupid mistake and book your flight back home or your flight somewhere else within such a short window of leaving the other place. Give yourself plenty of buffer time, and always remember that anytime you're switching islands or even cities in the Philippines, it's gonna be probably a whole day worth of traveling. So that brings us nicely into tip number 7, which to me is one of the most important tips, and that is plan ahead. And this might actually be kind of a controversial one, to be honest. If you watch a lot of creators who spend time in the Philippines or Asia, you will see people who kind of fly by the seat of their pants, right? Like they just rent a scooter or whatever the case may be. They show up into some town or village they've never been to before. And then it's kind of like, well, where am I going to stay tonight? There's certainly advantages to this. You're going to most definitely save money if you go straight to the source versus like booking something ahead of time on Agoda, Airbnb, or Booking.com. There is a lot of, how do I say this politically? I can understand that there's an added layer of excitement to just showing up to a new place and then just kind of finding your own way through it. But to me, I like to have that peace of mind of knowing that my reservations, my accommodations, my plan is laid out in advance. I feel like that's the best way to, yet again, utilize the most boots on the ground time that you can, because time is limited. You can't just be out there for as long as you want. And so do you want to spend your time out there, limited as it may be, searching for the best hotel price, or do you just want to know exactly where you're supposed to go and just show up there and then start having fun and enjoying yourself? I recommend using Booking.com and or Agoda. I do not recommend using Airbnb. Spoiler alert, all of the properties that are available on one site are going to be available on all of them. But the difference is on Airbnb, they're going to be a lot more money. And I'm not just saying a little, I'm saying like a lot. $50 a night in some instances. I've seen difference between Airbnb and Booking.com. Booking.com is the GOAT as far as I'm concerned. You may personally prefer Agoda. You may even have a different app, but definitely utilize these to plan ahead. And it also makes good for budgeting, because if you know how much money you're spending on hotel, well, then you know how much money you've got to spend on souvenirs or excursions or whatever the case. And speaking of getting around in the islands, what is the best tip or advice that I can give you for that? And this one is actually one of the things that I love most about the Philippines, and that is renting a scooter. Generally speaking, you can rent cars, you can get taxis like Grabs, you can get trikes, especially on the smaller islands, to take you around. Tuk-tuks, they call them too sometimes, I think. Maybe at least in Thailand they do. But to me, there's almost no better way to enjoy the Philippines than renting a small little scooter and enjoying the scenery that's around. Not only can you really avoid traffic, but you get to own your own destiny. So if you see something on the side of the road that interests you, or you just want to take a scenic detour around a place, you can do that. Now, I definitely do not recommend renting a scooter and then driving it in Cebu, Manila, or Davao, or even a medium-sized city like Cagayan de Oro. I would never do such a thing, and I would never recommend doing it. If you've got experience in Southeast Asia on a motorcycle, then it might not be an issue to you. But to me, it seems like a death wish. And I also don't recommend learning how to drive a scooter when you arrive in the Philippines, even though, truth be told, that's exactly what I did in Siargao, and I had the time of my life. It was scary as hell. It was raining when I was learning how to do it, but it's not that difficult. Kind of approach that at your own risk. If you do want to do that, the best way to do it would be to enroll in an MSF course here in America before you go to the Philippines, because you're going to learn a whole lot more than you are just kind of figuring it out on your own or watching YouTube videos, right? And you're going to have that confidence to be able to take that scooter and not feel like trapped to only be on one route from, say, your hotel to the surf spot down the street or something, right? So it's worth the investment to go take the MSF course, get your motorcycle endorsement on your license, and it's going to make sure that when you get to the Philippines, you have no issues with a scooter, because some properties, they are going to be more strict than others when it comes to, do you have a driver's license that allows you to drive a motorcycle? Wasn't an issue at mine. They even asked me, do I know how to drive? And I said, well, no, I've never actually driven one before. And they said, you'll be fine. And that brings us right into tip number 9, which is, what even should you pack and what should you bring? For me, like I said at the beginning of this video, I've made a lot of mistakes in my previous trips before. I almost always brought on one somewhat big carry-on plus a personal item like a backpack, and I always had some big ass suitcase that I had to lug around. It's really impractical and kind of dumb to do such a thing. You're going to be going routinely from planes to trikes to taxis to buses to ferries and everything else in between. The more encumbered you're going to be, the more stressed you're going to be trying to keep up with all these things, the less amount of fun you're going to actually have. So what I do now is go strictly carry-on. So one bag, a duffel bag, usually 40 liters, I think is about the max that it can get and still get away with the weight and size limits. So take one duffel bag full of nothing but your clothes, and then have your carry-on like a backpack for something that you just keep all of your heavy-duty electronics, your battery packs, your cameras, in my case, laptop if you insist on bringing one, which I think is kind of silly to bring a laptop to the Phils, but that's just me. Keep all of that in a backpack along with your paperwork, your prescription pills, things like that, which is a bonus tip we're going to talk about in a second. That will allow you to have a lot more fun and be a lot less stressed and be a lot more mobile. And you have to be mobile in this country, man. So with that in mind, speaking of medicine, my very first trip ever outside of North America was to Bali. And I got the notorious Bali belly, like everybody seems to do on their first trip out to Indonesia. It was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. I kid you not, I was texting family members from the bathroom of this hotel in Bali that I had not left for 4 days because I really thought that I might just actually die of dehydration. So now, anytime I ever go to the Philippines, I always make sure, or anywhere in Asia, I always make sure to have a doctor appointment first and get a fresh new prescription for some really strong anti-diarrheal medicine, a antibiotic. You can get healthcare out there, but it's definitely limited depending on where you're going to be. And to me, it's just better safe than sorry. Now, luckily, I've never had to use either of these drugs when I've been in the Philippines before, because maybe the health standards are just a little bit better out there, believe it or not. If you're going out there for the first time and you're adventurous with what you eat, which you absolutely should be, definitely recommend having some kind of prescription strength anti-diarrhea or antibiotic, or both. Can't hurt, doesn't weigh down your bag a whole lot, and if a situation arises, you're gonna be really glad that you've got something good. And the last tip that I can offer to any of you guys out there is to just totally embrace and be open-minded about everything that you see and that you do out there. The people in the Philippines are some of the most amazing, grateful, warm people I've ever met in my life. You won't ever find a group of people anywhere on this planet, I don't think, that have life harder but are still as happy as they are. Don't be ever afraid to say salamat po every time somebody does something for you, even if it just seems innocuous and small. Learn as much of the language as you can so that you could at least converse. And then just take advantage of every opportunity that you see. If a Filipino wants to talk to you, if they want to show you a part of their culture or tell you about their family or what they do, engage with them. Remember, you are a guest in this country, and it's important to represent your home country well, especially if you're like me and you're from America and maybe your international reputation's a little bit tarnished these days. Be a good representative of your country. Be a good guest when you're in this country. Treat the people with respect. Enjoy every second that you get to be there, because it should absolutely be cherished. There is no place quite like this country. It is just absolutely magical. And if you go there with an open mind, you are going to have a great time. I promise you. And yeah, that's about it. I'm sure that there's some things that I forgot. I kind of wanted to make this video like a little bit more off the cuff and not necessarily the generic travel tips that you get on other people's channels and stuff. So, but I'm sure that I've missed some things. So definitely let me know in the comments what tips we're missing. If you've got your own private hacks out there that you think would be beneficial to the rest of the people watching, leave them in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about it. And yet again, if you enjoyed all this content, then please do me a favor, like the video, share it with somebody you know, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.